seen the new Indiana Jones movie? I enjoyed it. I found two very interesting things in the movie. One of them was the Antikythera, which is the main plot device of the movie, and the other one was the Holy Lance. Now, the Holy Lance is a real-world object, right? I'm not sure about the Antikythera. It's sort of misconstrued with a few Greek sources, but the Holy Lance was a real thing that was actually made. And if you're at the beginning of the movie, you'll see the Nazis fighting over it. They want to take it to Hitler because they believe it has certain magical or supernatural properties. What would those properties be? Well, it's also called the Spear of Destiny. And what that means is that the bearer of it cannot be defeated. Now, what is this Holy Lance? Well, the Holy Lance is the lance that pierced. You can look at John 19:34. Pierced the side of Christ, and out from it came blood and water, right? So the thought is that this lance from the 1st century AD would be imbibed with supernatural powers as a result of having touched Christ at such a significant moment. So it would make sense, at least in the story, that the Nazis would want it, right? For in pursuit of world domination, what could be greater than a supernatural object that makes you destined to win every conflict you're in, right? But this is a real item. This is a real item that exists in the world. So the first mention we get of it, one of the first mentions we get it from it, and we get the name of the centurion who pierced Christ. His name was Gaius Cassius Longinus. And we get his name from an apocryphal book called the Gospel of Nicodemus. According to that tradition, he's the same centurion who in Mark 15:36 exclaimed, "Truly this is God's son." So as the story goes, Longinus had an eye ailment. He was partially blind, and upon piercing Christ, some of the blood came into his eyes, and he was miraculously healed. He eventually became a convert to Christianity, but then they also say that Longinus became a monk, which we know didn't happen because there were no monasteries in the 1st century. Now, there are 3 big major claims to the Holy Lance. There are 3 churches who claim to have the real one, or rather 2 churches and a royal treasury. And I'm going to go in the order of which are more or less the oldest to the newest, ending with the Vienna Lance, which is the one that the real-life Hitler and the Nazis had pursued, like in real life. And General Patton had seized from them before they could hide it away and take control. So, first, the Roman spear. So this spear is currently held in St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican, and I think it has the greatest claim to being the true lance. We have it described to us by Cassiodorus, who is a Christian scholar and Roman statesman in the mid-6th century, and he described a certain spear being understood as the Holy Lance that was venerated at Jerusalem, right? So about 550-ish. That's a big gap, right? That's about 500-year and some change gap between the death of Christ and the finding of the lance. But I'd like to pose you this. If any of the lances were real and it was preserved, where would you expect it to be? Jerusalem, right? And so in the 6th century, we are told that it was being venerated at Jerusalem. Now, we don't know if it's older or what exactly its details are. We just know that in the 6th century, we have the first record of it. So, this lance takes a little trip to the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, somewhere around 615, by way of the Iranian king Khosrow. At some point between then and the 15th century, it gets seized by the Ottoman Turks. In 1492, the Turkish Sultan Bayezid II gifts it to the Pope Innocent VIII. Now, why did he give it to Pope Innocent VIII? The reason he gave it to Pope Innocent VIII was because Pope Innocent VIII was holding in prison the Sultan's brother, who had been causing constant rebellions and constant claims to the throne. He was his younger stepbrother, Sem Sultan, and he failed a bunch of times, but he was just relentless. So at some point, the Pope Innocent actually did use him to sort of cause some uprisings during the Crusades, but for the large part, Pope Innocent was paid a butt ton of money, a lot of the money which went to paying for the construction of the Sistine Chapel, to keep Sem Sultan under lock and key. And one of those items was the spear of Longinus, the Holy Lance. Now, there should be some caveats. There is a claim that the one that the Sultan gave to the Pope, right, because it falls out of Christian hands and goes into Turkish hands before it is given back to Pope Innocent VIII. And since then, it's been held in St. Peter's Basilica, right? But is that the one that the one that the Turks gave to the Pope? Is that the real one? Some people say that he had stolen the one from Antioch, which we'll talk about in a moment, and that's a really interesting story. But he had taken the one from Antioch and he'd substituted it. So we don't have the original one from Jerusalem. Now, this is a minority of people. I'm not sure it's super credible. There's links in the bio if you want to go into it more. We do, however, have people confirming that a part that was held in Paris and the part that Pope Innocent got, they're two parts of a whole, right? So this is a very old piece with some parts in Paris and some parts at the Vatican, which were confirmed to be one of a whole and confirmed to have been from the 6th century, at least prior to, and those two parts had been confirmed to be there since before the Turks, I believe. So this is certainly the oldest historically verifiable one we have. Now, there's the Lance of St. Maurice, which we'll get to in a second, which is the Vienna lance, and that may be older, assuming certain things, but this is the one that we have the oldest documents for as going into the 6th century. Now, this is all good and all, but does it have a divine claim to authenticity? Well, I'd like to introduce to you the Antiochian lance. So, I'll set the scene. The year is 1098. The Crusades are going on full blast. The Christian side has just won back the city of Antioch and is heading east. We start hearing some very interesting things from a French priest named Peter Bartholomew, who said that St. Andrew had appeared to him in a dream and a bunch of recurring visions and told him where the Holy Lance was under the church in Antioch. Now, they started construction, they found it, and hurrah. It's a Holy Lance. It was confirmed by a vision, right? Peter Bartholomew was actually the one to find it when he jumped into the ruins. But anyway, they found it. It was used as a symbol for morale in the army. And overall, Peter B. was seen as a confirmed prophet and an important religious leader by this point. Now, he did start engaging in some murderous behavior. He started selecting people from the army and declaring that they would be executed for their sins because they were particularly sinful. He also started interfering with the general's plans, saying that he'd gotten visions or that he had certain special insights that they needed to listen to onto his points. So it seemed like he was sort of using his position to dabble into other parts of the power structure. Now, people were not enjoying this. So they started to say, hey, we're not sure you're legit. We think you're probably a fake. And yeah, you better watch your step, buddy. And he was like, no, it's completely real. It's the completely authentic lance. And I completely know it for sure. And so they asked to prove it. And he replied, trial by ordeal. And trial by ordeal, I don't know if you've ever seen some of the older movies where the two knights fight each other, and the victor is assumed to be in the right on that issue. So like, oh, my lady has been accused of impropriety, and I will fight on her behalf, and may God show the victor to be truthful, right? And so the idea is that God's providence will reign over that event, and sort of whichever way it goes, that's how you'll determine that it was true or not. So Peter B says we're going to do a trial by ordeal, but specifically we're going to do a trial by fire. So you're going to put me at a stake and you're going to light me on fire, and I'm not going to burn up because God is going to confirm that this is the real Lance. He burns himself to death on his own volition, off his own suggestion. And so since then, the Antiochian Lance has been pretty discredited. Now, the final lance, the Vienna lance, the Nazis' lance, the World War II Spear of Destiny. We have a lance in the Imperial Treasury described in 10th century records, and it is described as being the lance of Saint Maurice, who was an African Christian general who was placed in Switzerland in the 3rd and 4th centuries, and he was told to worship pagan deities by the Roman Empire. He refused. He also led all his compatriots in the army to refuse, and for that reason they were martyred by the Roman Empire somewhere 3rd or 4th century. So if this is real, if the lance is from the 3rd or 4th century, this would make it the oldest, right? But we don't have a record of it being from Saint Maurice until the 10th century, right? Which is why I made the delineation with the first lance that I mentioned in Rome. Now, in the 10th century, the Holy Roman Empire gets a hold of it, and eventually a legend grows around it that it houses one of the nails that pierced Christ on the cross. I'll throw up a picture right there. And if you look at it, the spearhead is sort of hollowed out, where you'll see a particular iron implement stuck in the middle. And so, in the 13th century, German emperors began using it in their coronation ceremonies as a symbol of divine power and attribution of proper authority, since it is the spear that pierced Christ, right? Eventually, it is moved to Vienna after some kerfuffles with the French. And in 2003, a metallurgist by the name of Robert Feather examined the spear. Right, this is the interesting part. He says the outside spearhead cannot go farther back than the 7th century. There's some people who say it is definitely later, but that's the earliest date, not any farther back than the 7th century. However, the middle part, the nail, is consistent with a nail from the 1st century AD. And this is the interesting thing about this lance. This Holy Lance, although it is associated with the other Holy Lance claims, it is not specifically the Holy Lance that was pierced Christ by Longinus, although some people would assert it. The basic assertion from Vienna Lance authorities was that it housed the nail, the actual nail, one of the nails that hung Christ on the cross. That's the one that's in the middle. It has all the same magical properties and whatnot. It's just slightly different in that respect. And the interesting thing about that is that it's, at least from an archaeological standpoint, the nail is consistent with other nails of its period and type. So the Nazis were holding on to this. It was a significant German symbol of political power, and they had hidden it away when the Allies invaded Europe. And so General George Patton got a hold of it, held it away from them, was able, along with a bunch of other regalia and important national treasures, because the Germans had been hiding it away just in case, in order that they could have a strong political symbol if they ever needed to rise up again. So General George Patton definitely grabbed it, kept it away from the Germans, and did not return it to Austria until after World War II. The plot thickens. In 1972, an author by the name of Trevor Ravenscroft wrote a book called The Spear of Destiny, in which he said that Adolf Hitler started World War II because he wanted to find the Spear of Destiny. And, well, his source was mystical personal meditation. And having spoken to some Austrian professors in a vision through a medium. So you can see about how legitimate that is. So to sum up, we had the Roman lance, the Antiochian lance, and the Viennan lance. Now they're all of historical significance, and they've all definitely played a part in many different wars as different political symbols. Most recently in World War II, which is why the Indiana Jones movie presents it there. It has some historical as well as fictional significance in that world. But what I want to ask you is, which lance, if any of them are real, which lance do you think has the most legitimate claim to being the true lance? Leave that in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy this video. It took me a whole week to write out and sift through all the research. So have a good day.